Okay, so I forgot because I'm using the free version of this. My videos can only be 10 minutes long, so I got to get moving. All right, so we're talking about the social contract, and yeah, if you have more questions about that, just come talk to me. We've gone over that a lot in class and stuff. All right, so um, the section of your book ends with the woman's question. I should note that these notes do not cover all of the reading. There's a few things I left out, so this is not the be all and end all, but it just gives you some ideas. All right, so the idea of what role did women play in the Enlightenment and how did it change women's role in society as a result of the Enlightenment? Just because the Enlightenment was all about people being equal doesn't mean that all these philosophers were like, yay, let's have women join us and there are equals. But some were more accepting and more encouraging. For an example, Voltaire did write that women are capable of all that men are regarding their intellect. And there were women becoming more involved in these ideas as well. Mary Estelle of England argued that women needed to receive better educations. If women seem less intelligent, it's only because they are not receiving the same schooling that boys were at that time. And a counterpart of hers would be Mary Wollstonecraft, who's known as the founder of modern European feminism. And in our video, we got into her as well. So now what you want to do is that's the basis of what we're learning about from the textbook. Now there's several readings I gave you, and I want you to try to incorporate those ideas from the readings into your paper. Don't just use this video and take a quote from something I said or wrote here. Use this as a starting point as to where to go in the readings, because the readings go in much more in depth, of course. I'm just going to give you some points to lead you in a direction. Besides your paper, you want to be able to talk about these readings during the discussion, right? So try to spend some time with them for this month. So the longest article is entitled Work in Progress. It's Feminism and the Enlightenment from 1650 to 1850. And the author is Barbara Taylor. And it was published by the Oxford University Press. And she brings up lots of questions. Some of them are just basic. When was the Enlightenment? Because if you think about when it was, that's going to change things. So a lot of people think it's now longer than maybe what we have in our timelines, for example, in class. The long version is that it began in the 1690s and it lasted to the end of the 1800s, maybe into the beginning of the 19th century. And the shorter version is, well, no, it's between 1740 in 1790. So she writes about a historical connection between the Enlightenment and then the rise of feminism. And the question is, what access did women have to the world where reason was performed? Because so much of the Enlightenment is about reason. And if women were prevented from being in that world where it's practiced, how could they embrace the Enlightenment or be affected by it? So the concept of Enlightenment ideas now is also widening throughout history, that it actually encompassed a lot more ideas and sometimes contradictory ideas than we may have thought. The Enlightenment world both resisted feminism and both encouraged it. And that's mostly what this article is about. So think of the ways that it resisted and encouraged it. Keep in mind also that the word feminism wasn't even used until the international suffrage movements in the late 19th and the early 20th centuries. So that's something to keep in mind. They weren't using this word at the time. And many of these countries where the Enlightenment was really flourishing in, think France or whatever, um, still focused a lot on the roles within the family. And did that contradict feminist ideas? So did that prevent um, the women's equality that some were searching for? Some people, like Locke, um, he set in place concepts of individual autonomy and political justice central to the entire Enlightenment project. This is a quote from the reading, of course, here, not me. And it writes that his fierce attack on the patriarchal model of political authority, they have not meant to encourage criticism of patriarchal power in the family, but this was one of its far-reaching effects. So something to keep in mind as well, so that's an idea, that the idea of what the Enlightenment is widening, because some of the ideas are completely contrary to one another. Other ideas from this is that while we think of the Enlightenment focusing on equality, many philosophers actually focused on the differences between man and woman, which often sort of hung on to traditional prejudices that were a role at the time. Another question you may ask is, what role did religion play in this? And you would think that traditional religion, i.e. the Catholic Church, would prevent feminist theory from holding on to the Enlightenment. But actually, there was a strong case for women's spiritual equality during the time. Okay. Think also, we keep thinking of France when we think of the Enlightenment, but think of Britain, and that we're going to get to shortly how that's where the Industrial Revolution began. And that environment, right, this sort of adds to one of your questions we're talking about here, sort of aided women in their search for equality, because women were entrepreneurs and women were consumers, so their roles were changing. The the conclusion of the author is fairly long and asks some questions. I don't want to just summarize it here. I'd like you to look at it, but these are just some points of things you could address. Okay, another reading is Personal Freedom in a Planned Society. This article is much shorter. Um, Give me a second. I have my papers and different readings from this. But this reading is about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and the author is Professor J.P. Suda, and this has a thesis. So I don't think you would necessarily be writing about his point, but if you do write about Rousseau, this would be an article worth reading. So at the beginning, he summarizes much of Rousseau's argument, things about the social contract, that man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. He breaks that down a lot. And then he says these chains, these restraints, are incompatible with liberty, right? Rousseau wrote about that. And then also, authority and liberty don't go well together, right? They're going to contradict each other. But can you find an equilibrium? And you can find an equilibrium, but the more you plan for economic and social conditions, the more you disrupt that. And this is where the author gets into his specific thesis. There's different types of planning, and it's usually rational, right? Rational thinking is important to the Enlightenment. Can you plan and have individuals accept the goals of the state? And he even goes back to ancient philosophers about Plato, and Plato saying you can plan a good government without getting in the ways of the people. And the author here does conclude that being devoted to the social good is more powerful than being devoted to personal freedom, which is a big focus of Rousseau. So if you're right about Rousseau, it's a short reading. I'd give it a shot. The Descartes reading, this one can be tricky, but I know there's lots of students who are really good at math and very interested in math in this class. And that's basically why I chose this one. So if you do like math, maybe you'd want to answer the question that about a philosopher and focus on Descartes. We think of Descartes as a philosopher, but not so much as a mathematician. But there's some really interesting explanations in this reading. The reading focuses that Descartes was in the search for certain knowledge, and it explains his preoccupation with mathematics, how he had these mathematical ideas that were analytical, but how he was able to take them and extend it beyond mathematics. And a lot of it was about synthesizing, and the author gets into exactly what he was synthesizing. I won't get into all of that here, but something you may want to look into if you're interested in. He also says how Descartes' method of finding knowledge would be contradictory to the way Galileo found knowledge. And he has a conclusion.